All right, we're in the little epistle of Philemon, and we have a few questions here. The first one is this: we don't know how Philemon responded to this letter. What are some things you can think of that would have influenced how he responded? And in our study, there were a number of things that were mentioned, but the primary one was this: Paul's relationship with Philemon. Paul's relationship with Philemon. That, if it were a relationship where Philemon felt that Paul was abusive or authoritarian, dictatorial, if it was a relationship where Philemon thought Paul was always telling him what to do, always telling him how to live his life, that, of course, would have caused Philemon to receive the letter one way. And on the other hand, if Philemon felt that Paul was always serving him, that Paul was always faithful to him, that Paul was always loving him and showing him patience and kindness and was such a blessing to him, if they had that kind of relationship, then Philemon would have received the letter differently. But the primary factor determining how Philemon would have received this letter, I believe, is the relationship that Philemon had with Paul. Now, we're not privy to that in the Bible. There's no record of the relationship with Philemon and Paul outside of the letter itself. But I believe, in harmony with the Christian virtues, that Paul was like the person described over here, that Paul was the way that Jesus came to us, not as a harsh dictator, not as a lording master, but as a servant. And I believe that's the relationship that they had. I want to make a point from this, that this letter has been used to bring out great points about different relationships, and I believe they're all valid, but there's one I want to highlight here. We can look at this from the perspective of the relationship between Jesus being our intercessor before the Father. And so in this example, Jesus represents Paul, Onesimus represents the Father, Jesus represents Paul, Philemon represents the Father, and Onesimus represents us. There are lessons there. We could also look at it from the perspective of ourselves interceding before the Father on behalf of others. So, of course, in that, we are Paul, Philemon is the Father, and Onesimus are others who we're interceding on behalf of. But there's one perspective from which I believe we can glean a very pointed, very cutting message. And I believe that perspective is to view this as a letter from Jesus to us on behalf of the Onesimuses in our life. So Paul here represents Jesus. We here are represented by Philemon. And the Onesimuses, who are the Onesimuses? Now that question I can't answer entirely. That question is up to you. Who is it that Jesus is asking you to forgive on behalf of your relationship with Jesus? Notice in this letter, Paul does not point to Onesimus. He doesn't use the fact that Onesimus is so sorry. He doesn't use the fact that Onesimus is reformed. He doesn't use the fact that Onesimus may have come back with money in hand to return to Philemon if he had stolen anything. He doesn't point to Onesimus and use that as the basis for why Philemon should forgive him, but he points to himself. He points to his relationship with Philemon and says, on behalf of this Philemon, will you forgive this Onesimus? So the question is, who are the Onesimuses in your life? Who are the individuals that have caused you grief, may have caused you harm, that currently cause you harm? Who are individuals who are unfair, who have cheated you maybe? Who are individuals who seem to be holding you back, maybe at work, or who are a challenge or a trial to you in school? Who are the individuals maybe even in your family who don't think highly of you and maybe even put you down? Or those who are always asking for things for you, taking advantage of you? Who are the individuals in your life that Jesus is asking you to forgive, not for their sake, but for his sake? These are the Onesimuses. And just like we see in this epistle here, the way you receive this letter from Jesus, this request from Jesus, it depends entirely on my relationship with Jesus. Do I view Jesus as a loving, serving, pitying, patient Savior who has forgiven me, who has been patient to me, who has been loving to me, who has been long-suffering towards me? Or do I view Jesus as the harsh dictator, as the lording master? Do I view Jesus as unforgiving, unloving? The way that I view Jesus, the way that Jesus has treated me, this will dictate how I respond to this request of Jesus, to forgive them for his sake. You remember Jesus, his great prayer to God was, forgive them for they know not what they're doing. And this was a blanket prayer that included those who were physically crucifying him, but also included all of those who have fallen prey to Satan's lies. And that includes the Onesimuses in my life and in your life. And so by the grace of Christ, may we learn to forgive them, for they know not what they do. May we learn to forgive them because we've been forgiven of Jesus.